They don't miss you the way you think they do. They miss the control. They miss the worship. And when that's gone, that's when the weight hits. Because the moment a narcissist realizes your love isn't coming back, something cracks. Not their heart, their ego. When we say narcissists don't feel lost the way emotionally healthy people do, we are talking about a fundamental difference in emotional wiring. For most people, losing someone they loved brings grief that is layered and relational. They miss the person's laugh, their presence, the shared memories, the small rituals, the emotional safety. There is sadness rooted in attachment. There is reflection. There is often remorse if they caused harm. The pain is about connection. For a narcissistic individual, loss is processed through a very different lens. Their relationships are largely organized around regulation of self-esteem. Partners are not experienced as separate, complex human beings with inner worlds. They are experienced as extensions, sources of validation, admiration, reassurance, and emotional stabilizing. So when a relationship ends, what registers most strongly is not the loss of intimacy, but the disruption of supply. They may say they are heartbroken, but what often drives the distress is the collapse of the structure that kept their fragile self-image intact. Your praise buffered their insecurity. Your loyalty defended them against shame. Your attention affirmed their importance. When that disappears, it can feel destabilizing, even panicky. But this reaction is about self-preservation, not mutual grief. An emotionally healthy person can sit with ambivalence. I hurt them, I miss them, I wish I had done better. A narcissistic person is more likely to oscillate between devaluing you to protect their ego or attempting to regain you to restore their sense of power. Genuine mourning requires empathy, the ability to imagine your pain and recognize your humanity independent of what you provided. That capacity is often limited. This is why their reactions to loss can look confusing. They may quickly replace you, not because they didn't care at all, but because they cannot tolerate the ego injury of being without validation. Or they may attempt to re-enter your life abruptly, not out of deep reflection, but because the absence threatens their identity. The loss feels real to them, but it is filtered through self-focus rather than shared emotional meaning. What they miss is control, validation, and supply, not intimacy. That distinction is everything, because when you understand this, their behavior after the breakup stops feeling mysterious and starts making psychological sense. In a healthy relationship, intimacy is built on mutual vulnerability. It involves seeing and being seen, knowing and being known. It requires empathy, accountability, and emotional reciprocity. But for a narcissistic individual, closeness is often instrumental. It serves a function. It feeds their need for admiration, reassurance, and significance. The relationship becomes a system designed to regulate their self-worth. Control is central to that system. When they know how you feel, when they can predict your reactions, when they can trigger your affection or your distress, they feel powerful. Your emotional responses confirm their impact. Your attempts to fix the relationship confirm their importance. Even your pain can reinforce their sense of dominance. Control stabilizes them. Validation is the oxygen. Compliments, attention, loyalty, defending them to others, forgiving repeated hurt, all of it reinforces the image they want to believe about themselves. Without consistent validation, their internal insecurities rise to the surface. Shame, inadequacy, and self-doubt begin to leak through the cracks. Rather than process those feelings internally, they seek external supply to drown them out. Supply can be admiration, sexual attention, praise, drama, even conflict. What matters is the emotional charge. Intimacy, however, requires slowing down, tolerating imperfection, and allowing equal power. That can feel threatening. True closeness exposes vulnerability, and vulnerability can trigger deep-seated shame. So when you leave, they may say they miss you. But what often hurts most is the loss of influence over you, the loss of guaranteed admiration, the loss of someone who oriented their emotional energy around them. They miss the role you played in their psychological stability. And that's why attempts to come back frequently focus on reactivating the old dynamic rather than building something new. The goal is rarely deeper intimacy. It is restoration of control, restoration of validation, restoration of supply. When we say they miss control, validation, and supply, not intimacy, we're pointing to the architecture of the relationship itself. For a narcissistic person, the bond is often structured around emotional leverage. Control means knowing they can influence your mood, your decisions, your sense of security. If they can pull you closer with charm or push you away with withdrawal, and you respond predictably, that gives them a sense of dominance. Your reactions become proof of their impact. Validation is the steady stream of reassurance that props up a fragile self-concept. Compliments, admiration, sexual attention, public loyalty, defending them when others question their behavior. All of this reinforces the identity they want to believe about themselves. When you provided that consistently, you weren't just being loving, you were stabilizing their ego. Without that reinforcement, self-doubt and shame can surface quickly. Supply is broader than praise. It's any emotional energy directed toward them. Excitement, jealousy, anger, devotion. Intensity is what matters. Even conflict can function as supply because it confirms they still occupy space in your mind. Silence, however, is destabilizing. Indifference feels like erasure. Intimacy is different. Real intimacy requires mutuality. It means tolerating equality, accepting influence from the other person, acknowledging fault, and allowing emotional transparency. That level of reciprocity can feel threatening because it exposes imperfection. Instead of shared vulnerability, the relationship often revolves around maintaining their preferred narrative. So when the relationship ends and they say they miss you, what often aches is the loss of that ecosystem. They miss the predictability of your devotion. They miss the way your attention organized around them. They miss having a reliable regulator for their insecurities. This is why attempts to reconnect frequently bypass meaningful accountability. The focus is on reestablishing access, not rebuilding trust. The urgency isn't about repairing intimacy, it's about restoring the flow of control and validation that once kept their internal instability at bay. The weight hits when admiration disappears permanently, and this is where the real psychological shift occurs. As long as they believe access to you is still possible, as long as there is a door slightly open, the urgency doesn't fully register. They assume they can return, charm, provoke, or manipulate their way back into relevance. Hope of regaining supply softens the blow. But when admiration is truly gone, when you are no longer watching, responding, defending, or caring, something destabilizing happens. Narcissistic personalities rely heavily on external mirrors. They construct their sense of self through reflected admiration. When that mirror vanishes permanently, they are left alone with an internal structure that is often fragile and underdeveloped. This is the weight. It is not romantic grief. It is the collapse of a feedback loop. If you once admired them, praised them, believed in their potential, or centered them emotionally, your attention reinforced their grandiose self-image. Even your tolerance of mistreatment communicated that they were powerful enough to override your boundaries. When that stops, not temporarily, but definitively, the illusion weakens. Permanence is the trigger. Temporary distance can be rationalized. They may assume you are angry, emotional, or trying to make a point. But when months pass and you remain unmoved, when you do not respond to subtle attempts to re-engage, when your life visibly continues without them, the message becomes undeniable. The admiration is not coming back. This can provoke a sharp ego injury. Without your attention, they may feel exposed. Questions they typically suppress can surface. Am I actually that important? Was I dependent on them? Did I lose something irreplaceable? These thoughts are uncomfortable because they threaten the superiority narrative. They may attempt to counteract this weight by quickly securing new admiration elsewhere. New relationships, public displays, achievements broadcast loudly. All of it can function as compensation. But replacement is not the same as restoration. When someone who genuinely invested in them withdraws permanently, the absence can linger beneath the surface. The true weight is not missing your love as connection. It is confronting a world where one less person is reflecting back the version of themselves they desperately need to believe. They experience ego injury, not heartbreak. And that difference is subtle on the surface, but profound underneath. Heartbreak, in its healthiest form, is relational. It carries sadness about shared memories, regret about mistakes, longing for closeness, and often empathy for the other person's pain. It reflects attachment. It reflects connection. It reflects the loss of something mutual. An ego injury, however, is about identity disruption. It is the psychological wound that forms when their self-image is threatened. For a narcissistic individual, the relationship is often intertwined with how they see themselves: powerful, desirable, superior, indispensable. When you leave, especially if you leave with clarity and boundaries, it challenges that identity. Instead of thinking, I hurt them, the internal reaction is more likely to be, how could they leave me? The focus centers on the insult, the rejection, the loss of status. Your departure becomes evidence that they are not as in control as they believed. That realization can feel humiliating. Ego injury often triggers defensiveness rather than sorrow. They may minimize you, criticize you, rewrite the narrative to portray you as unstable or ungrateful. This isn't random cruelty, it's psychological self-protection. By devaluing you, they attempt to reduce the threat to their self-image. If you were not that great, then losing you doesn't mean they failed. At other times, the ego injury can provoke pursuit. Sudden apologies, dramatic declarations, or attempts to prove their success are ways to restore equilibrium. If they can win you back or demonstrate that they are thriving without you, the injury feels soothed. Heartbreak softens people. It often leads to introspection. Ego injury hardens them. It leads to blame, comparison, image management. They may feel intense distress, but it revolves around damaged pride rather than shared emotional loss. That is why their reaction can feel cold or inconsistent. What looks like longing may actually be wounded entitlement. What sounds like regret may be a strategy to repair status. The pain is real to them, but it is rooted in self-focus, in the fracture of an inflated self-concept. rather than in mourning the depth of a bond that was built on mutual vulnerability. Silence and no contact amplify their psychological collapse in a way that arguments and emotional confrontations never could. When you argue, defend yourself, explain, cry, or plead, you are still engaged in the system. You are still providing emotional data. Even conflict reassures them that they matter, that they can move you, that they occupy space in your mind. Engagement, positive or negative, keeps the dynamic alive. No contact removes the feedback loop entirely. For a narcissistic individual, external responses function as emotional regulation. Your reactions tell them who they are in that moment: powerful, desired, feared, admired, envied. When you go silent, that mirror disappears. There is no affirmation, no outrage, no visible hurt to measure their impact against. The absence becomes destabilizing because it offers no reflection. At first, they may interpret silence as a tactic. They might assume you are trying to provoke them or gain leverage. This can trigger attempts to break the silence. Casual messages, nostalgic references, indirect contact through others, subtle visibility on social media. The goal is not always reconciliation, it is reestablishing relevance. When silence continues consistently, however, something deeper can occur. Without access to your emotional responses, they lose a predictable source of validation. The illusion of control weakens. They cannot gauge whether you still care, and uncertainty is profoundly uncomfortable for someone who relies on certainty of admiration. No contact also disrupts narrative control. If you are not engaging, they cannot easily manipulate the story between you in real time. They may attempt to rewrite it publicly, portraying themselves as unaffected or superior, but internally, the lack of access can feel like a loss of dominance. Psychological collapse in this context does not necessarily mean visible breakdown. It can manifest as agitation, impulsive decisions, rapid replacement relationships, or intensified image management. These behaviors are often attempts to counteract the void. Silence forces them to confront something they avoid, the possibility that they are no longer central in your emotional world. And for someone who equates significance with survival, that realization can feel profoundly destabilizing. They may attempt hoovering when they feel the void, and this is one of the most misunderstood phases of the dynamic. Hoovering is not about romance or revelation. It is about re-establishing access. When the silence stretches on and the validation they once relied on no longer flows, the discomfort can become intense. The void is not poetic to them, it is destabilizing. At first, the attempts can be subtle. A casual, "How have you been?" A reaction to an old photo. A message that appears neutral or even friendly. The tone is often designed to lower your defenses. If subtlety does not work, escalation may follow. Emotional apologies, sudden insight, dramatic declarations of change. The intensity can feel convincing because it is fueled by urgency. The urgency, however, is typically about restoring equilibrium. If they can pull you back into conversation, even briefly, the silence is broken. If you respond with anger, they still receive emotional energy. If you respond with hope, they regain influence. Either way, the void shrinks. Sometimes hoovering appears as vulnerability. They may describe hardship, loneliness, or regret. This presentation can feel sincere, and in moments it may even contain fragments of truth. But the deeper motivation is often self-focused. They want relief from the ego injury. They want reassurance that they still matter. Other times, hoovering is indirect. They may post content clearly aimed at you, use mutual connections to gather information, or create situations where crossing paths seems coincidental. The goal remains the same: reestablish psychological presence in your life. What makes hoovering powerful is the history you share. It activates memory, nostalgia, and unresolved attachment. They rely on that emotional residue. They count on the fact that you once cared deeply. When they feel the void, hoovering becomes a strategy to refill it. Not necessarily to rebuild something healthy, but to regain supply, influence, and validation. And if the door remains closed, the attempts often intensify before they finally redirect their energy elsewhere. Regret for them is about image damage, not empathy. And that distinction changes how you interpret everything they say after the relationship ends. When an emotionally healthy person feels regret, it often includes an awareness of the other person's pain. There is an ability to step outside of oneself and think, I hurt them. I see what I did. I wish I had acted differently because they deserve better. That kind of regret is relational. It carries accountability. For a narcissistic individual, regret is more likely to activate when their self-image is threatened. It emerges when the breakup affects how they are perceived by you, by others, or by themselves. If you leave and thrive, if mutual friends question their behavior, if their reputation takes a hit, that is when regret may surface. But the focus is often on consequences, not compassion. They may say, I messed up, but what they often mean is, I miscalculated. The distress centers on losing something valuable, not necessarily on harming someone valuable. The narrative inside their mind can sound like, I shouldn't have pushed them that far, rather than, I shouldn't have treated them that way. Image is central. If they once viewed themselves as irresistible, superior, or indispensable, your departure contradicts that identity. Regret then becomes tied to status loss. They may feel foolish for letting a devoted partner walk away. They may feel exposed if others see the relationship failure as their fault. Empathy requires tolerating shame, acknowledging wrongdoing without defensiveness. For someone organized around protecting a fragile ego, shame is intolerable. So regret gets reframed, blame may be shared, context may be exaggerated, your reactions may be portrayed as the real problem. This doesn't mean they feel nothing. They can experience distress, frustration, even sadness, but the emotional center of gravity often remains self-focused. The pain revolves around damaged pride, altered perception, or lost advantage. So when they express regret, it is important to listen carefully. Are they speaking about your experience, your hurt, your humanity? Or are they speaking about their loss, their embarrassment, their misjudgment? The answer reveals whether the regret is rooted in empathy or in image repair. The real power shift happens when you stop caring, not when you argue better, not when you prove your point, not when you finally get them to admit what they did. The shift happens quietly, internally, when your emotional investment detaches from their behavior. As long as you care in a reactive way, hoping, defending, explaining, waiting, the dynamic remains intact. Your energy is still oriented toward them. Whether you are loving them or fighting them, they remain the center of your emotional focus. That focus is power. It tells them they still matter deeply enough to move you. When you stop caring, something fundamental changes. You are no longer trying to be understood. You are no longer trying to win. You are no longer scanning for signs of change. The nervous system that once activated at their messages begins to settle. Indifference replaces intensity. For a narcissistic personality, this is disorienting. They are accustomed to provoking reactions. Even anger confirms significance. But indifference offers nothing to push against. It provides no emotional charge to absorb. It communicates without words that they are no longer central. This shift is powerful because it is not performative. It is not the silent treatment designed to elicit pursuit. It is a genuine reorientation of your attention back to yourself. Your decisions stop revolving around how they will respond. Your boundaries are no longer bargaining tools, they are standards. They may sense this change before you say anything explicit. The tone of your voice alters. The urgency in your messages disappears. The explanations grow shorter. You disengage from debates you once would have fought to win. When you stop caring, you reclaim psychological autonomy. Their approval loses value. Their criticism loses sting. Their attempts to provoke feel transparent. And in that space, the imbalance that once defined the relationship begins to dissolve. Because power in these dynamics was never about dominance in arguments, it was about emotional leverage. When you withdraw your emotional investment, the leverage disappears, and the structure that depended on it weakens from the inside.